Hi everyone, Ken from Whittling Woods back again with another tutorial. Today's tutorial is going to be a little different. We're going to not do any whittling. We're going to talk about selecting, maintaining your first whittling knife. I think it's an important thing for people who are just getting into the hobby. Again, this is going to be geared towards people who are really just starting out whittling and looking to purchase their first knife. I have a little selection here of the knives that I own. It's not all of the knives I own, but pretty much what I could fit in the camera frame. So anyway, we're gonna discuss the various options that are available and talk a little bit about the profile of different types of knives. So anyway, let me clean things up a bit, and I'll be right back. Okay, here are the three categories of knives that you can use for whittling. The top here is a dedicated whittling knife. This is obviously a pocket knife, and this is a Stanley 199 utility knife with some modifications to the blade. It can be used very effectively for whittling. You're going to also require some modifications to the blades on the pocket knife as well. We're going to discuss each category briefly, and hopefully that'll maybe clear up some questions that people may have. So let me get organized here in terms of the three different categories, and I'll be right back. Okay, here we are with category one, the dedicated whittling knife. I have a few examples here, 6 different knives. North Bay Forge, Mike Shipley, OCC Tools knives. These are 2 Helvey knives. This is a Denny knife, and this is a Mora knife. The important thing I think that you need to understand if you're looking at a knife is the design of the blade itself. The top 5 knives here are what's referred to as a sheep's foot. The spine of the blade itself actually tapers down to the cutting edge. The cutting edge itself is straight on all these knives. There's a slight curve on the North Bay Forge knife, but for all intent and purposes, these are all straight. Very easy to maintain, very easy to strop. If you have to hone the knife at some points, again, it's going to make it a lot easier. The straight edge really simplifies that task a bit. So from a maintenance standpoint, it's probably the easiest knife to maintain. I pulled out this Mora knife because it's a straight back design where the spine of the knife here is straight and the cutting edge tapers up to that. So it's a little bit different. In some ways, this is a very effective cutting tool and is used in a lot of applications. Personally, I don't use the straight back design. I prefer the sheep's foot or the straight cutting edge style. I think it's for the type of whittling I do and the multiple uses you can get out of it. These type of knives you can choke up a little bit more on and get some detail. It's a little more difficult with the straight back knife like this bottom Mora knife over here. The key though in understanding these type of knives themselves is the length of the blade, and in some respects the actual thickness and maybe the design of the bevel. All these knives, I would say, probably range in the cutting edge in themselves, range from about 1.5 inches to just over 2 inches, I believe. With discounting the Mora knife, this Helvey knife is probably the longest. And let's see, you've got, yep, that's about 2 1/8 inches long. The Mike Shipley knife is pretty close to that. It's maybe 2 1/16, 2 inches, give or take. The North Bay Forge knife is about 1 inch and looks like maybe 1 inch and 5/8 maybe. And the Denny knife is, the cutting edge itself is about 1.5 inches. So I would recommend, if you're looking at knives, that you one dedicated whittling knife. It's going to serve multiple purposes, both for bulk removal and detail. You go with a blade length of 1.5 inches to about 2 inches. If you're working on smaller pieces, most of the pieces I work on are 2-inch square. In other words, a cross section of the wood itself, or 2-inch square or smaller. So a 2-inch knife is more than long enough. In fact, you could easily get away with 1.5 inch knife if you plan on working on a lot of smaller figures. But I'd stick within that area. 1.5 inches to just over 2 inches is a very good starting point. It's a multi-purpose knife. Again, that design where it's a straight cutting edge, the sheep's foot design, straight cutting edge. Your best bet in terms of your first whittling knife. That's what I would recommend. And these are just different knives. I'll have a category. Some manufacturers probably scrolling on the screen somewhere, just so you can see. I'm not recommending any particular brand because every brand has its benefits and weaknesses, I'm sure. So, but look for that design and that length. That's going to be key. So anyway, we're going to bring out the next category, and we'll talk about that. Okay. Here's the second category. This would be the pocket or folding knife category, obviously. And you can see here I have a couple examples. This is a Rough Rider buck knife, and this is a Up&L knife from France, actually. This is their carbon blade. I clipped the edge on this. This was not designed like this. As a matter of fact, it was more of a straight back knife. The cutting edge actually sloped up, and I made some modifications. I clipped it, so excuse me for the people who think that's destroying the knife. That's the way I use it, and it works. It works well for me. I like this. I like this style and design a little bit better for the style of whittling I do. But anyway, these are basically your standard whittling knife. I've done a number of videos using the Rough Rider. It's a really great knife. It's the only problem I see with this particular Rough Rider is it's kind of small in the hand. It's not a very large, knife. You can see the handle itself is about 3.5 inches. So it's not the largest. The buck knife is a little bit more comfortable to hold. It's 4 inches, not quite 4 inches, but a little more comfortable. And then this folding Up&L knife is nice and kind of beefy to hold because it's 4.5 inches. Really comfortable in the hand. But that would be the only disadvantage. The issue with the pocket knives as your first whittling knife, absolutely doable. You're going to probably need to make modifications to the blades on these knives. They come with a fairly steep bevel a lot of times, or at least an average steepness in their bevel. And for the way I carve, and if you're carving specifically basswoods or eastern white pine softer woods, that bevel should be flattened a bit. And we're going to talk about bevels in the fourth part of this video, so keep that in mind. We'll discuss that in a little bit more detail. But there's some examples. The nice thing about the pocket knife, it does offer you the opportunity to have a longer cutting edge, shorter cutting edge. Again, even these blades were modified. I clipped this down a bit, and so I can kind of choke up a little bit and get some detail when I'm carving some features in figures. So anyway, keep that in mind. The nice thing about these knives, they all fold up. I mean, take this one for instance, which is actually, these knives have a great design. They not only fold in so you can carry it with you, they actually lock into place. So your blade is locked in, so when you're carving, it doesn't accidentally close on you. And not only do they lock in the open position, they also lock in the closed position. So it's locked in there. You just turn this little mechanism on the ferrule of the knife. So it's a great design. It's a good knife. I'll have to do a video using this knife. I've owned it for a while. I've modified the handle slightly. I kind of sanded down, made it a little rougher. It's just the way I prefer my handles. But anyway, that's your second category of knife. Let me pull out the third knife category, and we'll talk about that. Be right back. Okay, here's the third category, the good old Stanley 199. If you've watched my channel for any time, you've seen me use this knife in a number of little whittles. So it's a good knife to use with some modifications to the blade. It's definitely serviceable, and there's a number of people, well, a few people I'm sure, that use this knife that do some amazing wood carvings. You can find a few of them online. They do really great, kind of sought after by collectors. So it's definitely a knife that you can use and get some pretty impressive results with. I like it. I find it a great knife to use. The key here, the modification, I get asked this quite a bit when I use this knife, is the blade. What type of blade do I use? This is not the standard Stanley blades that come with it, which typically have 2 notches. I'm going to show you one out of the package here. Let me put it down over here. This is the Lennox Gold blade that I use. That's what's currently in here. As you can see, it has 4 notches. There's a little these indentations in the Stanley itself that hold basically normally the 2 center notches. The normal blades don't have these these notches on the ends. You're going to use basically the two center notches, but you could certainly use that in the Lennox. You could move it around. That's what it allows for. I set it in these last two notches so it extends out a bit further. You basically wind up with a cutting edge that's almost 1.5 inches long. With the normal utility knife blade, it's going to extend only about 1 inch. Perfectly fine as well. I like to have the little bit longer length, so I find these blades advantageous in that regard. A lot of people, like I said, ask me about this. Some people have said, "Oh, that looks dangerous extending that far." It's really not. I've used this knife for many, many years in this way. Never had any problems with it. If you do get a knife and you notice a little wobble in the blade over here, it could be just a manufacturing defect of that particular Stanley 199 body. It might be worth just getting another one. They're relatively inexpensive. Or you can maybe try, putting some duct tape in here to, create a little bit more thickness to the blade and maybe lock it in better. I've never really had any problems in that regard, so I don't really mess around with that. People have asked if I do some kind of modifications to lock the blade in place. I really haven't had to, so for my purpose, it works perfectly fine. Again, the modification is going to be in the blade itself. You can see the bevel edge here where that little gold is. That's going to be flattened a bit more to create a better whittling knife. So, but we'll talk about the bevel concept in the next part of this video. So there you go. I'm going to get some stuff out, and we'll go into talking about the bevel. Be right back. Okay, here we are, Whittling Woods, entering the big world with fancy computer graphics here. Actually, it's just a piece of paper. Hope you like my drawing. Anyway, this is some examples of bevels, cross sections of a knife blade, and bevel angles. It's not to scale or anything of that nature. It's just to give you an understanding when we refer to bevels, what we're talking about. This type of bevel is a very steep bevel. You can see there's plenty of steel supporting the bevel. This is basically a full flat bevel from spine to tip. You'll find this in a number of whittling knives. This design you might find in your typical pocket knife. This one maybe is what you wind up creating if you modify a pocket knife or a Stanley 199. Just this design difference. These you can actually, to get a knife this thin and ground this way, the steel has to be of high quality. The alloy that they use it has to be very good. So when you're looking for knives, again, the key thing is to look for companies. Some of the ones I pointed out, and I'll scroll the name of some of the companies. It's not an exhaustive list, and it's not, I'm not recommending any specific company, but those are some companies that produce knives in a small quantity, and they know how to prepare the steel. There's a lot of work that goes into understanding how to harden the steel and how to temper the steel on these knives. That's a key component. You can find relatively inexpensive whittling knives. That big online retailer that everyone flocks to, they sell plenty of brands where you can find a whole package set of knives for $50-$60. Hey, listen, that's nice to have all those knives. I think it's pointless to waste your money on a package set like this. I would buy one decent quality whittling knife before I would go with any package set. You're not going to need, for the time being, a hook knife or a lot of different detailed knives, or unless you're into chip carving, you won't need a chip carving knife, which a lot of them include, which is all fine and well. But again, what you're going to wind up having is either inexpensive steel that's going to be very difficult to maintain, or a very steep bevel, which is not going to be effective for whittling purposes. It might work well for, they use this type of design. This is what you'll find maybe on a meat cleaver or something of that nature, where you're chopping through bone. There's a lot of steel and on the tip here, and it's well supported, so it's a strong, secure tip and or cutting edge, and it'll work that well. And like I said, you can get away with somewhat cheaper steel when you do it like that. And it's actually very easy from a manufacturing standpoint to grind a bevel like this than it would be something like a flatter grind. It's much more expensive and difficult, and only professionals, people who know what they're doing, can really do that and do that well. Forging it to getting the taper flat grind like that is a difficult process, and that's why I would recommend going with professional knife makers. But you can take the Stanley or the pocket knife. You wind up maybe initially with a bevel like this or this, and you're going to wind up trying to get it a little flatter. I'm going to show you the next graphic here. This is essentially the type of bevel you're going to wind up. If you look at the red portion, this is the bevel design in a lot of inexpensive knives, maybe on the Stanley blade, maybe on pocket knives. What you're going to need to do is remove this red section, flatten it out a bit. And the reason for that, because people may ask, well, why do I need to do that? The flat grind, or the flatter bevel, it allows for the knife itself to pass through the wood more effectively. Gives you a better cut. It removes material well. Again, in softer woods, eastern white pine, basswood. If you're going to harder woods, oaks or like a birch, it's a harder wood. A long, thin bevel like that might not be that effective. That's why sometimes you'll see people who do some wood carving, they have different knives for different types of wood. If they're using a harder wood, they might not want a long, flat bevel. But most people who are just getting into whittling are going to go with basswood or eastern white pine or something softer like that. So you're going to want a nice long flatter bevel. It's easier to pass through the wood. It'll make your job a lot easier, and you'll be able to get much cleaner cuts. So keep that in mind. If you're going to go with if you're going to buy a Stanley or a pocket knife, you're going to need to do some work. All this red is going to, you don't necessarily have to go with a completely flat grind, but if you want to get it down a bit more, you're going to have to remove that wood. You're going to have to put it on wet dry sandpaper. You're going to have to put it on a grinding wheel, sharpening stones, and remove that red, hone the knife, strop the knife, and then it'll be ready for whittling. If you go out and buy the Stanley and buy a set of Lennox blades or the Stanley blades and stick them in there, it might not be that effective as a cutting tool. You're always going to be able to test how good your cutting edge is if you run it across the end grain. If this is your block of wood, like this, if you run it across the end grain, if you cut this section angle-wise on that block of wood, you'll be able to see when you're left with that little wedge, that chamfered edge over there. You'll be able to see how clean of a cut that is. If there's scratch marks in there, if there's tears in there, your knife's not ready to go. And I pretty much guarantee you, if you were to pull out a typical pocket knife or a Stanley 199 with a regular blade in there that's not prepared, you're going to see a lot of scratch marks. That's not ready for whittling. You need to do some work to do that. So if you're a beginner and you're not familiar with sharpening and changing the bevel angle on knife blades, it may not be the way to go. I still would recommend you give the pocket knife or the Stanley a try, because one thing nice about the Stanley especially, it's very inexpensive. The blades are cheap. You can stick one in there and play around with it. Try sharpening. Get yourself some wet dry sandpaper and try changing a little bit. See how you can do. You might find that that you get it pretty well. With some practice, you'll be able to do it. You're going to have to put the blade on there, raise it at a slight angle. If this is your sandpaper or grinding stone, when you put the blade on there, you got to imagine that the Stanley has a bevel like this, and right there. So you're going to want to get rid of all that additional. You're going to want to flatten that out to some extent. So you're going to have to raise the knife blade itself as you're passing it on the wet dry sandpaper, sanding or grinding stone, or whatever the case may be, just to start to take it down a bit, raise it a little bit. Then you're eventually going to keep it, flatten it. It's going to take a little time, but it's definitely doable. The nice thing about the Stanley is they're fairly thin blades already, so you're not removing that much wood. Pocket knife, it's going to be a lot more wood to remove, a lot more steel to remove. One thing nice again about the Stanley is you can do it pretty quickly. It doesn't take all that long to do. And it's a good inexpensive way to kind of get some basic understanding of what it takes to reconfigure the bevel on whittling knives. So keep that in mind. It's something you might want to consider. When you again, keep in mind too, some things to remember. Stropping is always going to be a key thing. Once you get a whittling knife, no matter what, if you buy a dedicated whittling knife or you modify your Stanley, your pocket knife, or other whittling knives that maybe aren't quite prepared the same way as some of the more professional whittling knives, you're going to do a lot of stropping, and you're going to do a lot of stropping anyway. So when you get the key thing, that if you've never done it before, the way to do it is you're going to get a piece of leather. You're going to maybe mount it to a piece of hard, oak, maple, whatever the case may be, or whatever surface you choose. Glue it to that. Apply some honing compound, and then run your knife on that. It's not a back and forth motion. You're going to move the knife across the strop away from the cutting edge. So if your cutting edge is over here, you're going to be stropping in that direction. If this is your cutting edge, you're going to be stropping it just that. Lift it up, move it again. Lift it up, move it again. Flip it over and keep doing it. You're going to see if it on the first pass on a clean strop, just with the honing compound down there, you should see black streaks right away on the first pass. It's your honing compound is sufficiently suited for cutting if it's leaving black streaks on there right away. So that's going to be what you're going to look for. On a clean strop, you'll see those black streaks form right away. It's removing some of the steel. It's really finishing that edge for you. So, but again, that's going to be something you're going to do regularly. You're always going to strop your knife. You won't have to necessarily hone or sharpen or any of that until you either damage your knife, or maybe annually, if you use your knife quite a bit, you might have to go back to a stone, and it'll be a very fine stone at that case. You only really need to go to a heavier grinding or heavier grit type of surface if you're really grinding the bevel down. Or you're damaged to your knife and you have to change the the configuration, or you do like I did, like take the Opinel knife that I had out before. This was, like I said, this knife here extended quite a bit further. So I used a rotary tool, cut the edge, and then I probably I did it so long ago, I don't actually recall, but I probably had a grinding wheel that I used just to kind of shape this a little bit. Again, I'm looking at it now, I probably would prefer maybe a slightly shallower angle on that, but it's works perfectly well for that. Again, I did it because I don't particularly like using the straight back design where the cutting edge tapers up to it. That's why I changed it. But that's when you're going to need to go to the heavier for this kind of removal, or for changing the profile of your blade. Then you'll have to go to some heavier grit just to remove it quicker. But the basic maintenance of a knife, you typically won't need to do that. And if you buy a quality knife, you definitely won't need to do that. I would recommend for beginners, you stay away from, like I mentioned, the package deals. It seems nice when you're looking at it on a cost per knife basis, but in the end, very frustrating. You won't really get a decent quality knife. Go out and spend $25 to $55 on a high quality whittling knife. Look at the specs I've talked about, and then it'll be much more beneficial for you. But anyway, let me just clean things up a bit, and we'll conclude this video. Okay, we can wrap up this video now. Here again, the three categories that we talked about: the dedicated whittling knife, the pocket knife, and the Stanley 199 utility knife. This type of knife, the dedicated whittling knife, from some of the manufacturers that I mentioned. There are others out there. I mentioned a few in the video. There are definitely others out there. They are dedicated to the art of knife making for whittling and wood carving purposes. You're going to get a knife that's ready to go. It's high quality. The steel, they know how to heat treat the steel and prepare it. In the case of North Bay Forge, they're forged knife blades, and other ones they're ground to perfection. Basically, you're going to get a knife that's really quite impressive, and it's designed specifically for our hobby, for whittling softer woods. In the case like the Helvey knives, they're designed primarily for basswood. You can use them in eastern white pine and softer woods like that as well, but that's what they're designed for. So your flattened bevel on there is, or your, the bevel that basically goes from the cutting edge up to the spine is what they're designed for. It's how they're made, and they're professionally prepared that way. And you'll, as a beginner, you won't get something that good if you go to a mass-produced type of company where it's stamped out in a factory and sold again online through some of the bigger retailers. These are companies that I would recommend you use and go with, because you're going to be really happy. If you go with the pocket knife of the Stanley, prepare to make some modifications, spend a little time. Perfectly good. It's a good lesson to learn. And in the case of really either, the pocket knives you can find for probably under $20, and the Stanley is relatively inexpensive, and the blades are inexpensive. You can monkey around and change the bevel angles on these and try to make some modifications yourself, and not worry about ruining a higher quality knife. So it's a good learning process to own one of these knives, and I would definitely recommend it. I think it's a good thing to do. But for the most part, once you get into the hobby, you're going to own multiple knives, and I recommend you start with one decent. I mentioned the specs. I think it should be a sheep's foot design with a flat cutting edge, between 1.5 inches and 2 inches long. I know this video seems kind of obvious when you say, go out and, what should be your first whittling knife? Go out and buy a whittling knife. It's kind of obvious. There's a lot of different styles out there, and as a beginner, you might look at them and go, I don't know what to get. My recommendation for standard whittling, for stuff in the category, like I said, if your figure cross section of the wood you're using is around 2 inches less, maybe slightly larger, could go maybe even 3 inches, slightly less in cross section, down to 1 inch or smaller. Definitely any of these knives will work fine. You'll eventually get other knives. You'll get more detailed knives. In the case of Denny knives, which unfortunately I don't believe are manufactured anymore, you can get with a smaller blade where they, basically it's like maybe 7/8 of an inch, something like that. Or you can, you'll find other types of knife designs, like I believe, okay, here we go. Here's the North Bay Forge. This is a very smaller detail knife, again, probably under 1 inch, and it allows you to get in there, very choke up on it, and get some detail when you're doing maybe eyes or nose or the mouth or something like that. It makes it just easier. I don't want to make you think that having one of these knives, you can't do that. I've done videos for full figures using these knives. In fact, all of them, maybe not the Helving knife, because I don't use this one all that much, but definitely these knives, you've seen me do complete figures with them. That's very doable. This design, especially when it tapers down like that, is very good. It allows you to get up and close, so it has that advantage. This looks kind of bulky. People have asked that of me too, like, oh, it's such a bulky knife, why use that, why not? Actually, you'd be surprised that that cutting edge or that little point can get in and get some amazing detail. So challenge yourself. These are interesting ways. If I was starting out today, I've been whittling, wood carving for a little over 20 years. If I was starting out today, I would go pick up a knife that's in the 1.5 inch to 2 inch category from a dedicated manufacturer, like I mentioned. I would also probably run out and pick up a Stanley, maybe a pocket knife, just to play around with. I think there's good things, but I wouldn't worry about getting a lot of knives from the get-go. Get yourself one good knife, and you'll really be good to go. Anyway, that's it. I don't want to drag on the video too long. If you do have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section. I always read all the comments, and I do my best to answer everyone, and I do appreciate the feedback. It helps me out quite a bit. So anyway, that's the conclusion of the video. The next video I have coming out will be back to little figure carving, so stay tuned for that. Again, I appreciate it. Enjoy your whittling day, and have a great week. Take care.